provide treatment interventions to be able to help an individual perform their daily routine. And this can include safety with meal planning and preparation, managing medications, finances, our safety with our mobility or walking, and when appropriate, working with individuals to be able to return to driving and or employment. So there's three other areas as an occupational therapist that we evaluate. One is more along the lines of motor skills, and more specifically with the upper extremity. So we look at range of motion, strength. This is a dynamometer, kind of it gives us an awareness of someone's maximal grip strength, coordination and dexterity. Occupational therapists with speech therapists, we evaluate cognitive or thinking skills, so attention, memory, problem solving, our speed of thinking, reasoning skills. And then a lot, especially working here with Dr. Pellick in our visual skills. At a basic level, it can just be focusing on eye movements, and more importantly, in the PCA population, would be our visual perceptual skills. And I'm going to go into much more detail in further slides, but that's how we perceive, recognize, and interpret the world. And there's a wide variety of therapy interventions for someone that may have a visual field loss, a loss of vision in one or both eyes. And I'll show you some examples of that too. In cognition, again, this is a shared area of interventions between occupational therapists and speech therapists. Our testing, our standardized assessments, they can expose where we might have some limitations in orientation, attention, our focus attention, our short-term memory, problem-solving reasoning skills, our reading abilities, and executive functioning. And executive functioning is all-encompassing. That's kind of like the CEO of our brain. How well do we remain focused, organize, plan, prioritize, start a task, stay focused, I think that's hard for all of us, I can speak for myself, and make the appropriate adjustments through the task so we can complete that activity. In therapy, if I'm evaluating someone, I'll look at cognition and vision together, and we start, again, this is very specific to the individual and based on the testing results. We will begin with some various strategies of what's important for them to be able to fill in these gaps or where they're having some limitations. And we all must become an expert at using these strategies, especially with using a strategy for organizing our day, paying attention to appointments, managing our medications, and we kind of go through what you currently are using, what's working, what's not working, and what other strategies can we implement. There's a wide variety of apps for a smartphone for medications. And if you don't want to use your smartphone, there's even electronic pillbox dispensers that have flashing lights and alarms. We encourage all of us know that when we work the best, so if we're doing really demanding tasks, either thinking-wise or physically, we want to carve out that portion of the day where we feel the freshest to complete those more challenging activities. Decrease distractions and interruptions. And if we must switch to another task, if we're in the middle of something, all of us, I think, use a pretty good strategy of, okay, let's make some clear notes of where I am stopping this task. If I have to go and do something else, I have to go run an errand or whatever the task might be. And when I come back to it with my clear notes, now I know where to pick up right where I left off. Now focusing more on vision. Some components of what we may look at in therapy are just specific eye movements. But more in the PCA realm, we look at perceptual skills. And one of the tests that we might do, it's pretty comprehensive. And I have samples of this test in each of the areas of perception. But it's broken down in to 5 areas. So visual discrimination. That's our ability to identify differences of visual images. Spatial relations. That is my ability to understand, well, where is this object in space? Is it up? Is it down? Is it flipped over? Is it altered in any fashion? Visual memory is our ability to recall any type of visual stimulus. Figure ground, and I'll give you examples of each of these, so how it makes sense in day-to-day activities, is the ability to identify an object or a figure from a background. Visual closure, ability to identify forms or objects from incomplete presentations. And then the one other area that we focus on, again, if an individual has a visual field loss, one eye, both eyes, how do we compensate for that? This is an example in the testing material number 1, is how can we identify differences in visual images? So you have 5 figures down below. Which one is different? Anyone?
Which one's different?
4. Which one is different than the others? It's like Sesame Street.
It's hard to see the numbers back here.
Oh, okay.
Number 4.
Right, number 4. You're right. And some of these, as I've blown them up, they're a little bit grainy. I apologize for that.
Very small.
And how is that important? Visual discrimination as we are going to our closet, identifying different articles of clothing, different styles of clothing, from tops, bottoms, and so on. Spatial relations. This is our ability to understand an object's position in space. So in this testing material, you have the figure at the top, and then you're asked to find this figure down below. The figure could be smaller, larger, darker, or rotated in some fashion. So we're looking at this figure, and you can see it down here in the second one. It's smaller, and it's been darker. So it's looking at a relation of an object. If it's altered in any way, we can recognize that. And in day-to-day life, how do we recognize where things are oriented? Up, down. Figure ground, this one is really going to be a little bit grainy in its presentation. And I'll show you again a little bit later another figure of how this presents itself in day-to-day life. In the testing material, you have an image down below, and in this very disorganized, distracting image, you're asked to find how many circles can you locate within this figure. It's easier in the book. I showed you in the book, it's less grainy. So you're looking for this circle in here, and where can I find it, and count how many of those circles I can locate. So let me show you. This is, again, the ability to identify an object, a figure, from the background. So if someone looks at just this figure, tell me what you see.
2 faces.
2 faces. A vase, right? What about on this side?
Same.
Yes. So you can either choose to look at the white, and you get 2 faces on the vase. You look at the black, and you have the opposite image. So it's identifying a figure from the background. Visual memory. You are presented with random figures for 5 seconds. And then I take the image away, and I give you options. You have to recall the material you just were attending to for 5 seconds and telling me where it is on the next page. Or a task can be, in some of our test materials, it's just, you have 10 objects. You study those objects, I take them away after a period of time, and you either tell me or you write down as many of those objects that you can recall. Visual closure. It's the ability to identify forms or objects from an incomplete presentation. Again, this is going back to the testing material. You have the square at top. And if you would finish drawing each of these figures down below, which one would match the figure at the top? And it would be this one, right? Now tell me if anyone has a drawer like this at home. Right? This is figure ground. This is visual closure. This is a nightmare for most people. So you, at times, some of the objects are covered up by other objects. That's part of figure ground and visual closure. Can I identify, this is a calculator down below, but behind the calculator is a deck of cards. There's paper here and envelopes, I believe, and here is a portion of a pair of scissors. So it's being able to identify objects without being provided the entire image. Okay, now let's jump into a little bit of my show and tell that I have here. And if anyone has any strategies, I think this is a great opportunity to share, because I think I learn from my patients and caregivers, and I would love for you to just kind of jump in. So then we think about your home environment. How can we ideally make the environment so that you can navigate, be safe and successful with all types of tasks? Brightness, contrast is key. So we want to have plates and bowls located on a very dark contrast. This bowl is nice because it has lips, rather than a traditional plate, as we were talking, where things can easily slide off of it. A coffee mug or coffee in a white mug, placing light colored objects in very dark colored trays. Marking edges of stairs with any type of contrasting tape. And what's nice is that you can get duct tape now in all different types of colors. Same thing with electrical tape. Anywhere that we can build contrast. Or using our other senses, touch. You know, microwaves, so many of them, it's either just a white, there's very little contrast. It's either white or black. And I sometimes like to use Velcro on commonly used buttons where somebody can feel them for the buttons that they use most often. Adding lighting, figuring out where we need to add light within the home. There are motion sensor light switches, LED lights. What's the ideal type of light switch? For near point activity, sometimes for some individuals, headlamps have been beneficial. Reducing as much visual clutter as possible and clutter within the home. How can we organize our furniture in the most predictable manner? Clear pathways. And again, using our other senses. Pouring drinks. Again, we want to use our tactile. So we're going to be taking our pitcher, and if we're pouring into another glass, this is clear, so it's hard to be able to see where the liquid is. I also have a brightly colored ping pong ball in there that kind of gives me a reference point if I'm filling up things. Where am I getting to the top? Where am I getting to the edge? But I'm also placing the rim on top of the cup, giving that input. Where are the two objects in space? Cutting foods. Has anyone seen any of these adapted cutting boards? People begin to worry naturally about their one hand holding an item while the other one is cutting. There's many processors. This was initially, brought on the market more for individuals that are one-handed after maybe suffering a stroke. So it has the two little prongs that you can place objects onto the prongs. It stabilizes it. As I then go and start cutting things, my other hand comes off of the cutting board.
Can we turn on the light while you're demonstrating?
Absolutely, if I remember which one it was.
I think that
Okay.
most people just can't see that.
How about that? Is that better?
Is that better, everybody?
Now everyone has to wake up.
Yeah.
You're all busted. So again, this is a one-handed cutting board. And then these little borders, like if you wanted to place bread and spread things, it just keeps it from moving around on you and you're chasing it around. Environmental cues. This is just more of an education component. How do we think about environmental cues? Well, as we're navigating to stairs, we always want to gravitate to the railing. My hand goes onto the railing and it is obviously slightly in front of me. And as with each step, I'm reaching down with my toe to be able to navigate where is the depth, where is that next step at. And then as my hand goes down the railing, when I get to the end of the railing, that's the environmental cue. That tells me I'm getting to a landing or I'm getting to the end of the stairs. Ambulating in the community. Sometimes people don't need any assistive device, but if you're going to maybe a crowded environment, I had a gentleman who is going to Italy. His balance is fairly good, but in unfamiliar territory, he is maybe going to consider using trekking poles, just to be able to give him some added support and stability when he's walking in more unfamiliar or crowded areas. Depending on the individual's presentation, their vision and or if they have a visual field loss, we do some training, and it's called the Lighthouse Visual Scanning training. So sometimes we get very focused or we're looking down all the time because we want to make sure that we don't fall. But if we do have a visual field loss in one eye or both, we have to emphasize moving the head and eyes to compensate for that visual field loss. So in therapy, we may practice this. I have a LED red light, and I have someone just first start at eye level, okay, looking at the light. Now I'm really kind of forcing them to do a little bit of scanning, and I'm thinking of my head very similar to a lighthouse. My head is moving, my eyes are moving. Especially if I have a visual field loss, I need to move into the direction, move my head and eyes into the direction of the loss. First, I'm stationary, but then I start adding in movement, or we work outside in more unfamiliar areas, so we can fill in the blanks of where there may be limited vision. Orienting clothes. Sometimes for some individuals it can be really hard, especially if clothing, there's not a contrast. Or I have people feel for the tag. If there's not a tag, how do we find the front, the back of a shirt? And sometimes fabric paint, I made it very large, but you don't need to make it that large, can reference, okay, now I have this white shirt and I have to attempt to figure out how to get this on. Well, I need to be able to figure out where the back of the shirt is. And if you have a tag, I have them use the fabric paint on the tag to begin the reference of orienting things. Button-down shirts, I encourage people to keep them halfway buttoned, and you can just place it on it like a regular pullover shirt. I think depth perception and judging distances can sometimes be challenging. And so we do practice where we believe the object is located, we're really focusing on, okay, I'm always wanting to bring my hand in line to where I think the object is, because very frequently that can be easily missed and items can be knocked over. Revolving doors can be avoided at all costs and try to just navigate to the stationary doors, right? So this other word, proprioception, this is a really helpful part. It's body awareness. It's us knowing where our body is in space when we're not using vision. So I was looking for something that had a hole in it. So I know that I have a spatula in my right hand, and as soon as I take vision away, I know that right now my palm is up. Now my palm or my forearm is what we would call neutral. In the position I would shake someone's hand. Now my palm is down. If we have good awareness of where our body or hand is in space without vision, it helps us in navigating in general activities of daily living. Electrical outlets, again, we can either use a bright tape around the plate, or if we have lighter walls, we definitely want to see if we can purchase plates that have a brighter contrast to be able to help an individual locate them. Glass doors, again, marked with very large details at eye level. For reading, it can be, again, so many of this is specific to the individual. Of where do we find that ideal font size so that reading at some level can be enjoyable? So we will play with that font size. It's different for everyone, but you can also purchase large print magazines. If someone is reading, I'd like them to use a line guide. All that the line guide does, or their finger, is it tells the eyes where to go, where you don't get lost as much. And if we don't have to, if we're getting lost in the material, then it's really hard to hold on to the information and retain it. We're constantly going back and rereading. Same thing with writing. If we are practicing writing, I sometimes will use a ruler, and we start writing with larger defined lines, but then the ruler kind of spaces or tells someone where to place the letters. Or we may practice even printing skills, spacing and size of letters, and I use grid paper. Or even, I have one gentleman who really wants to be able to sign the holiday card. And we talked about, okay, if the message is written, can we just make a very large contrasting window where he can go and practice signing his name on his holiday cards. Okay, one other item that, has anyone heard of the Dynavision? So this is a fun, well, I would say fun. You might not. I'll have a video of it. So the Dynavision is a 4-foot by 4-foot visual attention and scanning board. It was used initially or brought into the industry more for sports, for eye-hand coordination. Then Mary Warren, who is a very well-known OT that started doing a lot of research with the Dynavision for individuals where it would be beneficial for an individual with a neurological change. So let me pull this up real quick. Oh, I don't have audio. Okay, well, oh, and it's not up there.
Look at me.
It's on my screen.
Devastating.
I can see it. Can't you guys see it?
So then you can share the screen.
Yeah, you share.
I'm gonna have you do all that good stuff. I will mess it up.
That's what I.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't even think about talking to you about this at the beginning. I just, in my mind. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too.
So are we.
I know, this was my big finale.
You do.
Ah, you are the best ever. And it's okay, we don't have to have audio, just because I can explain it. I want to go back.
Is that you?
Is that me?
That is you.
Do I not look like me? Have I aged in the last couple of weeks?
You're wearing a different shirt.
Okay. So, I want to go back one more. So the gentleman that's actually doing the test, like this one. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's a 4 foot by 4 foot board, and there's 4 different tests that we do on it. So we do evaluation and training on it. This first test is just for 60 seconds, and we can adjust the height of the board so that they can comfortably reach the top, bottom, left, and right. And his goal is to visually scan. Okay? A red light appears, he has to reach out and press on that light as quickly as possible.
That's like like an automated visual field.
Yes. So what's nice about it is it's real functional. You go through so many testing with the ophthalmologist here that can let us know if there's any type of visual field loss. This is really, how do I use my current vision and or where I might have some limited vision and compensate for it. Get really quick at my head turns, scanning, and reaction time. And then it will the results of it, it breaks the board down into 4 squares. So this should be done in just another couple of seconds, because again, this test that I had him do was only 1 minute. But the information that it gives to us, I think, is very useful to the individual and to the treating team.
Can you control the speed?
No, not for this. So this test that he's on, technically, yes, it is self-paced, meaning it won't go to the next light until you hit it. So it will remain on. And that's how we get a visual reaction time processing speed. So if you're really slow, it will record that. And until you hit it, then the next one appears. That's one test. But there's another test that the second the light is on for just a little over a second, so you really have to move. And this is me just explaining that it gives us information on your speed of visual attention on if that board is broken down into 4 squares. Upper left, upper right, lower right. And for testing, there's 4 tests that we do, but then we can also go into a training mode.
Does UCH have one of those?
We do! This is literally been in our department for a month.
Wow.
So I used this in another setting that I worked in and absolutely loved it. So I have been fighting for the 2 years I've been here. But I think it has so much value for so many different diagnoses. And I'm now explaining how challenging I can make it for someone. I can have someone stand on an unstable surface. They can still be responsible for having to hit the lights. And then I can be really mean, and I can give them cognitive tasks to do at the same time. So we call that multisensory. And it's hard. So yes, this is, I want to call it my baby, but it's really, it's university's baby. All right, and then my last thing was just my final wrap up, I guess. Any questions on that?
How would one be referred to take this test? Would it have to be just an OT referral or?
Correct. Through any of the ophthalmologists or the optometrists here, I mean, I work with Dr. Pellick. So they would do an outpatient OT neuro evaluation.
Okay.
So just make sure that you have neuro in there. Otherwise, you might end up sitting in front of a hand therapist and they're like, well, why are you here? Because OTs have different areas of specialty over there in the rehab department. So then you're going to be stuck seeing me possibly. So hopefully that's good. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. Then I'm just coming to summary. Oops. So treating individuals with PCA is, I find, challenging, and that therapy really does tend to take on a little bit of a trial and error approach of what works best for that individual. Because what we've found that works for some individuals may not work for someone else. And what we find that might work will work possibly for a period of time, but it might need to be altered down the road based on changes. And if the patient or the caregiver has much information or details that they can provide to the therapist of what's challenging, then in those therapy sessions, we just have to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what type of strategy might help that individual in their home or the community. So that's all I have. Hopefully, there were some helpful tips.
Yeah.
I have some business cards if anyone needs to kind of reach out to me for any follow-up questions. I do have about another 5 minutes or so, but then I do have to unfortunately pack up, and I have a patient at 10 o'clock. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
My wife had a problem plugging the charger cord into a cell phone.
Yes.
Are there tricks and tips for doing that?
Could we maybe, I mean, I think of it as a contrast, because usually, you know, if we took the very end of her charger, the USB, and we highlighted that in some fashion, even with red tape, does that help her orient? Because it's hard. That little, you have to get it the right direction, right? And get it right spot on. So that's where, again, we have good sensation and that proprioception, it makes that task a little bit easier. But as far as your other adaptations, anyone else have any suggestions?
We actually bought Mom one of the cordless chargers.
Where it just sets on it?
It's called Key. It's QI, I think. So you have to make sure that you get one that's certified by the cell phone manufacturer, because otherwise it'll poop out on you pretty quick. So she's got a Samsung phone. We got the Samsung Key charger, and she basically, it's just a circle, and she has to set it
On top of it.
like that. And we started by painting the black part of the cord with like bright pink nail polish. That was helpful for a while, but now we just have moved on to that. That's working really good, right, Mama?
What's the name of it?
does work.
QI?
Yeah, I think it's like
Might be 2 eyes.
yeah, I think it
Okay.
might be. But so that's the
Yeah, that's
key.
very, I thought it was gonna be really hard. And for the first three or four days, I was like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And then all of a sudden, it's just like, duh. And she said, you're just gonna have to keep trying. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
So sometimes the problem is changing the pattern she had, but the problem she needs to have. Yeah. The pattern she needs to have.
Yeah.
She was used to struggling with that plug,
Yeah.
and this just
You
seemed
just
too
set it
easy.
right into, yeah.
It wasn't at all.
Oh,
Yeah. So we had to convince her that was harder. This is easy.
But just make sure, so it is QI, and make sure that they're about $45. But I would recommend buying one that is made from whoever makes the phones, because it's a weird technology and the generics are not gonna work.
I actually want to have another one of those for my bedroom.
You have one in your bedroom.
Well, where's that one, honey?
They're under $20, so I'm sure you could probably get one.
Did you have any
Or
advice
two or
for
three or
I have to
Maybe I just don't know where the
getting into the holes
Okay,
of,
that'd be great.
and I know there's only so many possibilities, but I'm constantly trying to figure out which way.
Which direction? So like when you're plugging in, maybe your hair dryer or anything like that?
Paint the top with green nail polish, so you know that's the top.
Well, what's
Or-
the top? I mean,
Once
Or
you
the
figure
blue,
that
or-
out, you're gonna put it in the plugs and gently unplug it and paint the top with your favorite color.
Keep it plugged
nail
in.
polish. Let it dry good.
leave it blank. I didn't,
Yeah,
But
I
I
keep on
did-
going to that. So much of that really is just trial and error and a lot of repetition, and it's gonna take some failures until you get it correctly. If you can't do what you're doing, add in any type of contrast. That helps with orientation. It tells you what's top.
yeah,
It
'cause
tells you what's
I
bottom.
did tape the phone receiver because I kept hanging up my phone, but I didn't have that. And so I did tape
Did
that,
that
the
help?
bright yellow, yes, now I know where the actual holder,
Goes.
yeah, because it's just a big black mass.
Yeah.
If I put the tape there, I know exactly what spot it should be.
Sure.
I know, but. yeah,
I just have some
struggle.
really old fingernail polish because I actually used to paint my fingernails. Gave that up about 2 decades ago, but the polish lives. So I painted the very base of my phone and the top of the plug. So when I'm all done, it's the letter T. You can plug it in.
Oh.
Which stands for top, at least in my brain. Probably stands for torpedo in someone else's.
Well, I appreciate everyone being here today. And again, I can leave some business cards if somebody has any questions or any follow-up. I would be glad to answer any of your questions at another time. But I'm sorry, I have to kind of wrap up so I can get staff over to the application pavilion. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for a break.
Great.
That's great. Great.
I couldn't wait for more.
Great.